She thought she was buying a forgotten patch of cracked concrete, but the moment Lena Harwood stepped onto that abandoned airport, every instinct in her body screamed that something was wrong. The wind didn't just whistle across the empty runway, it whispered, as if warning her to turn back. But she didn't, and that decision would uncover a secret buried beneath 4 decades of lies, because hidden under the control tower, behind a door no one had opened since 1991, was a vault that held more than dust and darkness. It held $270 million, and a truth someone would kill to keep hidden. After that first chilling whisper across the runway, Lena Harwood stepped deeper into the airport she had bought for only $800, though even she couldn't explain why her pulse raced as if she'd just stepped into someone else's unfinished story. The morning sun broke weakly over the horizon, thinning through a pale curtain of fog that clung to the ground like it didn't want to let go. The air smelled of dust and long-settled memories, as if every inch of this forgotten airfield had absorbed the silence of decades and was finally exhaling it back into the world. Lena tightened her grip on the old metal clipboard the county clerk had handed her at the auction, her official ownership packet, a few vague forms, a receipt, and a map so outdated it didn't even include the last taxiway built in 1978. Nothing in that stack had warned her what was waiting here. Nothing hinted at the eerie pressure in the air, the strange stillness that wrapped itself around her like a place that had been abandoned. But not fully left behind. Her boots crunched across the cracked concrete, weeds rising through every seam like skeletal fingers refusing to die. Rusted hangars stood at the edge of the field, their aluminum skins warped and sun-struck, as if the decades had tried to melt them back into the earth. Each structure leaned a little differently, twisted by storms, time, and neglect. Yet beneath all that ruin, Lena felt something else, an invisible order, as if everything had once been arranged with meticulous precision. As if someone had built this place with purpose, and someone had fought hard to make sure no one asked about it again. She paused near the faded yellow line that once guided aircraft toward the runway. The wind shifted, brushing her hair back as though giving her silent permission to continue. For years, she had been drifting, brilliant on paper, directionless in life, a mechanical engineer without a passion, a mind built for solving problems, but no longer sure what problems were worth solving. Yet standing on this abandoned tarmac, with the world wide open before her, she felt something she hadn't felt in years, a pull, a direction, a beginning. Her gaze lifted toward the control tower, the shattered glass glinting in the morning light like the eye of a giant that had been asleep for far too long. In every photo she'd seen before the auction, the tower door had been sealed shut. No lock, no key, no explanation. The county had simply shrugged and told her, probably jammed from rust, not our problem anymore. But from this distance, Lena could already see it, the way the door sat perfectly straight, untouched by corrosion. It didn't look jammed, it looked locked, intentionally. A low hum of unease spread through her chest. She began walking toward it, her footsteps echoing faintly across the empty taxiway. Each step stirred dust into the air, little spirals dancing in the soft morning breeze. Lena's shadow stretched long behind her, bending across the shattered concrete as the sun slowly climbed higher. She could feel the entire airport watching her, not with malice, but with waiting patience, as though she were the first human presence it had seen in a very long time. The closer she got, the heavier the air became. Old signs clung to the tower's base, authorized personnel only, security clearance required, warning sun, bleached to near white. A thin metal ladder led to a rusted maintenance platform, and above it, The observation deck jutted out like a lonely guardian over acres of silence. The airport wasn't large, but it was isolated, not merely neglected, but forgotten with intention. Lena's mind flickered back to the auctioneer's voice, echoing in the small county hall filled with bored locals. Old Oak Ridge Regional Airport, Lot 14B. No utilities, no structures certified for use. Starting bid, $800. Anyone? No. Going once. She had raised her hand without thinking. The clerk had laughed under his breath. Whatever's out there, it ain't worth the gas you'll burn getting to it. But he was wrong. Even if she couldn't explain it yet, Lena felt it. Something out here mattered. She reached the base of the control tower. A single dandelion grew in a crack near the concrete foundation, its stubborn bloom trembling in the breeze. Lena's hand brushed the cold metal railing as she climbed the short steps toward the door. Her breath caught. Dust covered everything, except the door handle. Someone had touched it recently. Her fingers hovered just above the steel, the air cold against her skin. A faint tingle crawled up her arm, the kind she always felt when a machine was charged, powered, alive. But there shouldn't be power. According to the county's documentation, every cable feeding this airport had been cut 15 years ago. So why did the metal feel faintly warm? Lena finally wrapped her hand around the handle. The wind held its breath. The airport fell completely silent. She pushed. The door didn't budge. It was locked, not rusted shut, not jammed by debris, but locked with a force that felt deliberate. She stepped back, scanning the metal seamlessly fitted into the frame. It was far too clean, too precise, too new. Someone had replaced this door, someone in the last few years. Her heart thudded sharply. The story she had expected, of forgotten runways and moth-eaten hangars, crumbled around her. Something else was here, something the county didn't know about, or pretended not to, something buried under the skin of this abandoned airport like a secret refusing to die. Lena forced herself to breathe. The air tasted metallic, as if the tower exhaled remnants of electricity. She looked up toward the observation deck, where a single square of glass remained unbroken. It reflected the morning sun back toward her like a silent challenge. She felt it again, deeper this time, the sensation that she was walking straight into someone's unfinished past, and that past had been locked on purpose. She circled the tower, searching for another entrance. Vines clung to the far wall, thick and twisted, hiding patches of metal siding beneath. Old conduit pipes ran into the ground, though the lines had clearly been severed long ago, disconnected, dead. She brushed dirt aside with her boot, revealing the orange tips of cut wires. Then she found something that froze her breath mid-ex, hail. Half buried in the dirt, just beneath the vented siding, was a small rectangular notch. Too perfect, too sharp, too modern to have been installed decades ago. She crouched and cleared more soil. There, flush against the metal frame, was a concealed panel, a keypad, completely clean, completely functional, looking completely impossible. Every part of this airport belonged to the 1960s patched radar, analog wiring, old cold war architecture. But this keypad didn't belong here. It was contemporary, sleek, matte black, a faint digital shimmer beneath its surface, waiting to come alive. Her fingers trembled as she brushed dust away from its screen. For a moment nothing happened, then, faintly, impossibly, a single green pixel blinked back to life, like the heartbeat of something waking up after decades of forced sleep. Lena's pulse stuttered. This airport wasn't dead. It wasn't even abandoned. It was waiting for someone, waiting for her. She rose slowly, a chill sliding down her spine as though the tower itself had leaned closer. She glanced toward the open fields surrounding the airstrip, empty, quiet, wind swept, and yet she felt watched. Not by a person, by the place. The air shifted again, heavier than before, carrying with it the faint echo of something metallic deep inside the tower. It wasn't a machine. It wasn't the wind. It was almost like a memory resurfacing, trying to speak after years of being buried alive. Lena wiped her palms against her jeans and steadied her breath. The door was locked. The tower was sealed. The keypad was waking, and the airport, this forgotten, unwanted patch of rural land she had purchased without a second thought, was no longer silent. It was calling her deeper, calling her forward, calling her toward a truth she could feel, but not yet see. And with the weight of the entire airfield pressing behind her, she took one step closer to the keypad, toward the mystery that had clearly been waiting decades for someone brave or foolish enough to touch it. As the morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the broken runway, Lena felt something shift inside her. The quiet chapters of her life had ended the moment she stepped onto this land. Whatever story waited behind that locked door, she was already part of it. And as the light deepened, she realized the sky above her wasn't empty. It was watching, it was remembering, it was beginning. The moment the keypad's faint green pulse settled into a steady glow, Lena felt a quiet thrum beneath her fingertips, so subtle she wondered if she imagined it, but no. The vibration traveled up her arm like the slow awakening of something old, something buried, something engineered to outlive time itself. She withdrew her hand, startled, watching the surface flicker as if reacting to her presence. The soft hum in the air deepened, resonating through the metal siding, through the ground beneath her boots, through her chest. The airport wasn't waking randomly. It was responding. She stepped back, the dusty morning light bending across her shoulders as she tried to steady her breath. The sky above had shifted from pale silver to a deeper, warmer hue, sunlight fighting its way through the thinning fog as if desperate to illuminate what waited in the tower's shadow. Yet even as the brightness grew, the structure before her looked darker, heavier. More aware, Lena's throat tightened with a strange mix of fear and recognition. Things built with intention always had a voice, whether they spoke or not. She had spent years repairing machines, rebuilding engines, listening to the unspoken language of metal. But this place, this wasn't a machine, it was a message, and she had just answered it. Her gaze drifted to the tower windows. Most were shattered, the jagged remnants catching sunlight like fractured memories. But that single intact pane at the top, the one she had noticed earlier, still reflected the sky like an unblinking eye. The more she stared at it, the more she felt that the tower was not simply looking down at her. It was studying her. She shook off the thought and forced her mind back into logic, into the world she trusted. Circuits, wiring, pressure systems, mechanical design. Maybe the keypad had some sort of independent backup battery. Maybe someone had been here recently and charged it. Maybe the county officials simply hadn't noticed because they never bothered to check. But even as the excuses spun through her mind, she knew every one of them felt thin. Lena walked the perimeter of the tower again, slower this time, listening. Her boots brushed against broken glass and old gravel, the sounds sharp in the stillness. The wind had grown softer now, no longer warning, almost guiding. She traced her fingers along the metal siding, feeling for seams, hidden panels, anything out of place. Halfway around the tower she stopped. There beneath a rusted vent was a faint scrape on the concrete. Fresh, the hard edge of something dragged across the ground recently. She crouched, brushing dust aside. Beneath it, she found a thin line carved into the cement. Then another, forming a pattern too symmetrical to be accidental. It looked like the marks of a heavy object, maybe equipment, moved repeatedly in the same direction. Someone had been using this place, not in the distant past, recently. She rose slowly, heart hammering in her chest. If someone else had access, if someone else knew what was inside the tower, then why had they let the airport go to auction? Why abandon it entirely? Why leave it locked, humming quietly beneath years of silence? A low rumble echoed across the field as a distant tractor passed along the far fence line. The sound rolled over the runway like a reminder that the outside world still existed, mundane, ordinary, oblivious. But here, inside this forgotten airfield, the world felt split open. Every breath felt like stepping deeper into a place that had slipped between history and secrecy. Lena turned back toward the keypad. Its screen now displayed a faint outline, a rectangle edged with dim light, as if waiting for input. Numbers hadn't appeared yet, but the panel pulsed like a heart, steady and patient. She moved closer, feeling the warmth radiating from the metal frame. Her shadow stretched across the dirt, long and narrow, reaching for the keypad before her hand did. "Who exactly are you?" she whispered under her breath. The keypad answered with a soft click, internal mechanisms shifting, engaging, aligning like gears that hadn't moved in years suddenly remembering their purpose. That sound, precisely engineered, unmistakably mechanical, sent a chill through her. No abandoned airport should have a security system capable of waking on its own. Lena exhaled slowly, trying to center herself. She reached into her backpack, pulling out a small handheld multimeter she always kept with her. She touched the probes to the metal frame just beneath the panel. A flicker, a surge. Her meter registered a power soar, slow but stable, not a dying battery. Something transmitting energy through a hidden line. Something connected underground. She straightened, the implications hitting her like a cold wave. There was power here, real power, functional power, directed power, which meant the airport wasn't just abandoned infrastructure. It was a system, a dormant structure, a facility. Her breath grew shallow at the thought. The simplest explanation, that this place had been something else entirely, something never listed in public records, no longer felt like speculation. It felt like truth. She stepped back from the keypad, scanning the tower again. The building's foundation was thicker than expected, reinforced, almost bunker-like. The tower shaft seemed too narrow for its height, and the windows, those single, pane-reinforced frames, were not standard for small regional airports. It wasn't failing infrastructure. It was secure infrastructure, designed to protect what was inside. Lena's pulse quickened as she realized just how much of the county's story didn't add up. Budget cuts, weather damage, low traffic. None of that explained the internal renovations. None explained modern tech hidden behind decades, old siding. None explained power lines still alive beneath the ground. Her eyes drifted toward the runway, long, straight, eerie in its emptiness. A lonely ribbon of cracked asphalt stretching into silence. Birds perched on old landing lights, their silhouettes still and watchful. And for a moment, Lena imagined what the airport must have felt like in its final days. People moving with purpose, doors opening and closing, lights humming, radios chattering, then sudden silence, abrupt. Unnatural, not a slow decline, a stoppage. Something had shut this place down in an instant. She shivered despite the warmth of the sun. Lena turned back toward the door and rested her palm against the cool metal. The vibration returned, soft, steady, unmistakably rhythmic. A dormant engine, a breathing machine, a secret beneath her hand, and still the door refused to open. She looked at the keypad again, the green pulse syncing strangely with her heartbeat. It was waiting for something, an input, a code, an authorization. She didn't have those things, but she had curiosity, she had time, she had ownership. Superficial and unquestionable, this place belonged to her now. And whatever was locked behind that door, it was her responsibility to uncover. The morning continued to unfold across the airport, casting long beams of light over the forgotten hangars, across the rusted fencing, through the weeds that claimed every inch of broken concrete. The sky brightened, but the control tower remained oddly shadowed, as though refusing to give up its secrets easily. Lena stepped back one final time, absorbing the entire structure with a renewed sense of gravity. She knew one truth with absolute certainty. Now she was no longer exploring a forgotten relic. She was standing at the entrance of a story someone had tried very hard to bury. And the locked tower door was only the first whisper of the storm that was coming. As sunlight deepened and the morning settled with deceptive calm, Lena realized the airport wasn't merely abandoned. It was waiting for the right moment to reveal what had been hidden all along. And somewhere behind that sealed door, that moment was already beginning to stir. After the strange pulse of the keypad faded into the quiet hum of the tower wall, Lena returned to the runway with a new kind of awareness. Every crack in the pavement, every rusted bolt, every whispering gust of wind now felt like part of a puzzle she had only just begun to see. The airport no longer looked abandoned. It looked paused, as though time itself had stopped mid-breath, waiting for someone brave enough to press play again. The fog had thinned into delicate threads drifting low across the asphalt, moving like smoke from a fire long extinguished but never forgotten. Lena walked slowly, letting her boots sink into the rhythm of the empty tarmac. Her heart beat in time with the steady click of her footsteps. The silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt crowded with memories, with echoes that hovered just beyond hearing. She reached the edge of the runway where a pile of old documents had been left behind by previous scavengers. Weather, beaten binders, brittle pages, flight logs half eaten by time. She lifted one, brushing away a layer of dust that drifted into the air like grey snow. The pages crackled beneath her fingertips, fragile but somehow still alive with meaning. The first entry was dated July 18, 1989. The ink had faded, but the handwriting was urgent. Names of pilots, flight numbers, destinations. But something made her pause. The airport designation code printed at the top wasn't the one listed in any FIA registry. She knew that instantly. It wasn't even close. She flipped to the next page. More names. More codes, all unfamiliar. A cold sensation slid across the back of her neck. These pilots, these aircraft, they didn't exist in any official system. Whoever had used this place had been operating in the shadows, outside the air traffic world everyone trusted. And if those codes had never been reported, those flights had never been meant to be found. She moved to another binder, this one thicker, heavier. The cover read Fuel Distribution Log Terminal 3A. Terminal 3A. There were no terminals here. The airport had only one small passenger building, barely big enough for a coffee machine and a handful of chairs. But the logs were meticulous, times, quantities, destinations. Except the pages ended abruptly, no signature, no final entry. As if the writing had stopped in a moment of chaos. She placed that binder aside and lifted an old photo taped to the bottom of the box. 5 men stood in front of a twin-engine aircraft, their smiles stiff, their postures unnatural. But what struck Lena wasn't the plane or the expressions. It was the fact that none of their faces appeared in any aviation database she'd ever accessed. Not during training, not during her years repairing engines, not even in public archives. These men were ghosts, professionals who had left no trace of existing outside this moment frozen on film. Lena's heartbeat quickened. She turned the photograph over. A single number was written on the back in pencil, 4-1-9, The digits pulsed in her mind like a quiet warning. She rose, scanning the runway again. That number, it felt connected to something, not random, not meaningless. She looked toward the distant hangars. Could it be a code, a storage label, a flight plan? The airport seemed to hold its breath again, waiting for her to notice the next clue. A gust of wind stirred the edges of a torn manifest lying nearby. Lena bent to catch it before it blew away. The paper was fragile, almost transparent with age, but what remained was chillingly clear. Multiple fuel deliveries scheduled on dates after the official closure of the airport. Someone had kept this place alive long after it was declared dead. Her breath trembled. She looked toward the far hillside where trees arched like silent witnesses around the perimeter fence. The entire landscape seemed to lean inward, listening. She reached for another folder and unfolded a map. Hand-drawn, thick pencil lines marking paths that didn't exist on the county survey. Narrow corridors beneath the ground, access points, maintenance shafts, and at the center of the sketch, a small square labeled simply, Control Room Primary, not Control Tower, Control Room, as though the real heart of this airport wasn't above ground at all. A low, distant echo rolled across the field, a hollow sound carried by the wind. Not thunder, not machinery, something softer, like an old memory rising from deep within the earth. Lena's pulse tightened. There was more beneath this land, more than runways, more than forgotten equipment, more than history. She flipped the map over, and her breath caught. A second sketch had been made, lighter, less detailed, but unmistakably intentional. It showed the tower from above, the layout of walls and staircases, and on the right side of the drawing, a small rectangle labeled Frame Keep Add Later Installation. The handwriting did not match the first sketch. Whoever added that note had done so years later. Someone who knew the tower had been modified. Someone who knew the secret Lena had just discovered. The airport around her felt suddenly colder. She pressed her hand against the paper, grounding herself, breathing slowly so her racing thoughts wouldn't spiral ahead of her. The weight of the air thickened, as if the entire airfield understood she was getting closer to a truth long kept silent. She stood again, holding the documents close to her chest, feeling their age, their secrecy, their warnings. The runway stretched before her like a silent, broken throat, unable to speak the secrets buried beneath it. But Lena could feel them, hear them, almost understand them. Something had happened here. Something abrupt, deliberate, erased. She glanced back toward the control tower. The unbroken window glinted sharply in the noon light, a cold flash like a watchful eye catching the sun. The keypad's faint glow still flickered beneath the siding, pulsing with a rhythm that felt far too intentional to dismiss. For the first time, Lena sensed the deeper truth. The airport hadn't been shut down. It had been silenced, and whatever its last day looked like, it hadn't ended naturally. It had been stopped. As a new ripple of wind swept across the tarmac and lifted dust into shimmering arcs, Lena realized she wasn't simply exploring old records or abandoned structures. She was walking through echoes, living ones, left behind by people who had vanished without explanation. And the tower, locked and waiting, was the only place that still remembered the truth. With the documents pressed tightly in her hand and the weight of the silent runway behind her, Lena took a steadying breath. The story she thought she was stepping into was growing darker, deeper, more intricate with every clue. And as the sun reached its peak overhead, warming the air but not the chill inside her chest, Lena understood one thing with absolute certainty. She was no longer uncovering the past. The past was uncovering her, and the next step toward that locked tower would change everything. The more Lena explored, the more the airport felt like a place frozen mid-breath, An entire world caught between the moment something went wrong and the moment someone tried to erase it. She gathered the scattered binders in her arms, carrying them toward the small passenger building near the edge of the runway. The sun glowed against its faded exterior, turning its cracked windows into pale mirrors that reflected the emptiness around her. The sliding door didn't slide anymore. It groaned when she forced it open, releasing a gust of stale, cold air that carried the scent of lost time. Dust swirled around her ankles as she stepped inside. The room was stripped bare. No chairs, no signs, no equipment, just emptiness and echoes, as though whoever left hadn't taken their belongings. They had taken the memory of them. She placed the documents on a counter where a receptionist's desk once stood. The counter bowed slightly under the weight, complaining softly in the stillness. Light spilled through the broken window onto the papers, illuminating details she hadn't noticed before. Notations made in red ink, small pen scratches in margins, numbers circled as if urgently needed. Lena opened one of the flight logs again, studying the unfamiliar pilot names. They felt constructed, clean, too simple, like someone had manufactured identities instead of writing real ones. She ran her finger down the page and paused at an entry marked with a triangle instead of a signature. A symbol, not a person. Her stomach tightened. She opened another binder, this one containing operational notes. The first few pages were routine. Runway checks, maintenance schedules, weather reports. But halfway through, the handwriting changed abruptly. The script became hurried, uneven, as though written by someone who didn't have time to make their words neat. The entries grew shorter. Then they stopped altogether. The final note read only, "Ground team instructed to clear Level C access immediately." No date, no signature, nothing else. Level C. There was no such level on the official layout. Her thoughts flickered back to the hand-drawn map she found earlier, the one that hinted at structures beneath the surface, hidden corridors, underground access points, control rooms that had nothing to do with aviation. She leaned closer, heart racing as she traced the fading pencil lines on the map. There was a faint outline leading from the base of the control tower to a larger chamber beneath it, connected to several smaller hallways branching outward like veins. Lena whispered the words under her breath, "Level C." Her reflection wavered faintly in the dusty glass, distorted, ghost-like. The silence pressed in on her again, not empty, expectant. She took the documents, tucked them beneath her arm, and stepped back outside. The sunlight felt too bright for the unease curling inside her chest. The airfield stretched ahead, quiet but heavy, like it was listening to her thoughts. She returned to the runway, where the fog had fully burned away. Heat shimmered across the asphalt in thin waves, making the distant hangars look like mirages rising out of the ground. The whole airport felt like a stage set in the moment before the actors enter, suspended in that fragile breath between stillness and revelation. With the documents pressed close, Lena walked toward the far end of the runway. Cracks spidered across the surface, splitting into jagged lines that looked almost deliberate, patterns etched by time but resembling pathways. Her footsteps echoed through the open space, soft but sharp, like someone walking through a sanctuary of forgotten truths. She reached a rusted utility shed hidden behind a collapsed fence. The door hung crooked, unlatched, and scribbles of vines clung to the siding as if trying to pull the structure underground. She pushed the door open, and a burst of cold, stagnant air washed over her. Inside, coils of old wiring, fuel hoses, and dusty crates filled the small room. She set the documents on a crate and scanned the shelves. Amid the clutter, something gleamed faintly under a layer of dust. She reached for it, a small metal tag, square, heavy, stamped with a single number, 419. Her breath caught, the same number that had been written on the back of the photograph, The same number she couldn't shake from her mind. She turned the tag over. On its backside was a faded engraving, almost invisible unless the light hit it at the right angle. Tower access authorized only. The tag slipped from her fingers and clattered against the crate. The sound echoed, unnaturally loud in the cramped space, bouncing through the metal walls before dissolving into silence. 419 was not a flight number, not an aircraft ID, not a random marking. It was a key. A code, a designation tied directly to the control tower. Lena picked the tag up again, her hands trembling. She knew nothing in abandoned places stayed this clean, this preserved, unless someone had protected it, someone who didn't want it found. She looked back toward the tall silhouette of the tower, rising like a dark sentinel over the airstrip. The unbroken window glimmered sharply, as if aware she finally understood a fraction of its secret. The keypad, the number, the documents, the hidden levels, everything was pointing to the same truth. The tower had never been a tower. It had been a vault, a lookout, a portal to something buried beneath the airport in plain sight. Lena stepped outside, the tag clenched in her palm. The world felt heavier now, as if she had crossed an invisible threshold, one she couldn't step back from. Her gaze followed the long line of the runway. The wind lifted small waves of dust that rolled across the asphalt like whispered warnings, and somewhere deep within the earth, beneath concrete and decades of secrecy, something shifted, something she could not yet name but could feel in the marrow of her bones. The tag pressed cold against her skin. The documents rustled faintly. The tower's window gleamed like an eye reflecting light back at her. She swallowed hard. The airport wasn't simply hiding a story. It was guiding her to it, piece by piece, step by step, echo by echo, and now that she had touched the first layer of its truth, there was no going back. As the wind changed direction and swept across the runway with a long, mournful sigh, Lena realized she wasn't exploring a ruin. She was unraveling a secret that had waited too long to be found. And the next time she walked toward that locked tower door, she would not be arriving empty-handed. By the time Lena returned to the base of the control tower, the metal tag marked 419 pressed against her palm felt heavier than anything she had carried out of the shed. It wasn't just an object. It was a signal, a whisper from the past that she was finally holding in her hands. The tower loomed above her, the unbroken window gleaming like a quiet challenge in the afternoon sun, as though the building itself knew she was coming back with the first real key to its silence. The hum behind the keypad was stronger now, subtle but unmistakable like a heartbeat beneath cold metal. Lena crouched in front of it, letting the tag hang loosely between her fingers. A faint breeze swept across the tarmac, carrying with it the dry scent of dust and sun-warmed concrete. She pressed her ear close to the panel. There it was again. A soft, rhythmic pulse. Too deliberate to be decay. Too steady to be accidental. Her throat tightened. Machines didn't stay alive this long without purpose. And nothing about this airport, nothing she had found in the logs, the photographs, the hidden sketches, suggested this place had ever followed ordinary rules. She held the 419 tag up to the keypad. Nothing happened. No flicker, no sound, no mechanical shift. But the pulse behind the metal seemed to synchronize with her own heartbeat, almost recognizing her presence. Lena drew a slow breath, letting the air settle deep in her lungs before she spoke aloud, for the first time since stepping onto the property. "Okay, let's see how much of you is still awake." She brushed her hand across the keypad again, waiting for its screen to react. The faint green glow returned, dimmer than before, but there. The rectangular outline sharpened slightly, like a sleeping eye lifting its lid just an inch. Still no numbers, no commands, no obvious way to interact. Instead, the keypad did something else. something far stranger. It warmed beneath her fingertips, not sharply, not artificially, but gently, like a breath exhaled through metal. Lena jerked her hand back, startled. She stared at the device, her mind racing. Hidden wiring, a backup system, a thermal relay. Yet even as she ran through the logical explanations, her instincts pushed her toward only one conclusion. This thing wasn't powering up because she touched it. It was powering up because she was meant to. She stepped back, rubbing her hands against her jeans, grounding herself in something real. The wind shifted again, lifting strands of hair across her face. The runway behind her buzzed faintly as heat danced above the asphalt, creating shimmering waves that made the distant hangars blur into ghosts. The world outside was ordinary. The world here, round the tower, was anything but. She knew she needed to examine the wiring. The engineer in her demanded it. She circled the tower carefully, following the old conduit lines with her eyes. Most were ripped, severed, dead. But one, the narrowest one, disappeared into the ground behind a loose panel that seemed too new for its surroundings. Lena knelt. Dust rose around her in slow spirals. Her fingers worked beneath the edge of the aluminum, loosening the screws with deliberate pressure. When the panel finally gave way, a rush of stale, cold air escaped like something exhaling after years of being trapped. Behind it, bundled wires snaked downward, glossy, intact, modern. Her pulse hitched. "No way," she whispered. These cables weren't 30 years old, not 20, not even 10. Someone had updated this system recently, very recently. She leaned closer, narrowing her eyes. The wires were wrapped in temperature-resistant insulation. They were fed through industrial-grade conduit, and deeper in the gap, she saw something she recognized instantly, a power converter unit, military-grade, protected against EMP exposure. Her heartbeat hammered through her ribs. This wasn't civilian tech. This wasn't airport maintenance. This was infrastructure built for something hidden, something classified. Lena sat back hard, knees hitting the concrete. The truth she'd been nudging around, hesitant, uncertain, crystallized into something she could no longer deny. This airport had not died from neglect. It had been killed on purpose, and whatever had replaced its original systems had been buried deliberately beneath layers of rust and lies. The tag in her hand, the logs in her bag, the silent hum behind the keypad, none of it was accidental. Someone had used this place long after its closure, and someone else had tried just as hard to disguise every trace of their presence. She forced herself to breathe steadily. If the wiring had been updated, then the keypad wasn't a relic. It was a lock, modern, intentional, connected to something deeper and much larger than a rural airfield. Something in the tower was still receiving power. Something in the tower was still listening, and whoever built this system didn't want the wrong person accessing it. But Lena wasn't the wrong person, not anymore. This place was hers, legally, physically, and now by the strange gravity pulling her closer with every clue. She rose, dusting off her hands, and stepped back to the keypad. The green glow deepened for a moment, as if sensing her return. She lifted the 419 tag again, pressing it against the panel with deliberate force. Still nothing, but as she pulled the tag away, she noticed a thin groove above the keypad, a slit no wider than a credit card. It had been buried beneath dust and time, nearly invisible unless someone was looking for it. Lena's breath caught. She slid the tag's edge along the groove. The metal clicked. Soft, clean, precise. The keypad screen brightened instantly. Not fully, just enough to reveal something impossible. A single line of digital text flickering faintly across the surface. Authorization code required. Lena stared at the words, heart pounding in her ears. The device wasn't dead. It wasn't broken. It wasn't locked from decay. It was waiting for authentication, waiting for the correct sequence, waiting for the corresponding key. waiting for the exact code that belonged to tag 419. She swallowed hard. This was no ordinary keypad. This was part of a system she wasn't meant to find. A system someone hid beneath a defunct control tower, beneath a fabricated story of closure, beneath layers of forgotten history. She leaned her forehead against the cool metal frame, breath trembling as she whispered, "What were you protecting? All this time?" The wind swept softly around her, almost answering. Somewhere behind the tower wall, a low, mechanical whir stirred. A tiny shift, like gears aligning after years of silence. The keypad's glow steadied, faint but certain. Lena stepped back. Her path was no longer guesswork, no longer curiosity, no longer chance. Something behind that tower door was calling her deeper into the truth, and the first lock, however ancient, however hidden, was finally waking. As the late afternoon light stretched long shadows across the runway, Lena realized the mystery beneath this airport wasn't just alive. It was opening its eyes. The moment the keypad accepted the tag's presence, just enough to reveal that trembling line of text, Lena felt something inside herself shift. Not fear, not excitement, something deeper. A quiet alignment, as if her entire life up to this strange afternoon had been nudging her toward this exact spot on this forgotten airfield. The tower stood silent, but its silence no longer felt empty. It felt aware. The wind skimmed across the tarmac, brushing a faint current of cool air against her cheek. Shadows stretched from the tower's base like long, black fingers reaching across the concrete. Yet Lena didn't step back. She leaned closer. The keypad glowed faintly, waiting. Authorization code required, the words pulsed with an almost human patience. Lena pressed her thumb to the corner of the panel. Nothing. She tried pressing the screen directly. Still nothing. The device wasn't touch sensitive. It required a sequence, a code, something she hadn't found yet. But she knew the tag engraved with 419 wasn't random. Someone had marked that number for a reason. She slipped the tag into her pocket and examined the groove again, sliding her finger along its edge. The slit wasn't decorative. It was functional, built for a specific object. The tag didn't fit perfectly. Its dimensions were off by just a margin, which meant the original keycard or access strip was missing or hidden. Her breath steadied. If the system required an authorization code, then the answer wouldn't be in the wiring. It would be somewhere left intentionally, somewhere a person with clearance could find without help, but only if they knew where to look. Her gaze drifted across the tower wall, then lower, then to the concrete base. The markings she noticed earlier, the subtle drag lines in the dust behind the tower, came back to her mind. They weren't random. They weren't from wildlife. They were straight, consistent, as if something heavy had been moved across the ground repeatedly. Toward the rear panel of the tower, she circled the tower again, slower than before, reading the signs in the dust like forgotten footprints. 2 parallel lines, a small indentation where weight had paused. A faint arc where the object had been turned. A memory whispered in her mind. The maintenance carts she once used as a young intern. Flat, metal, low to the ground, perfect for moving equipment in secret. Someone had brought something here, something they needed often, something they didn't want to store inside. But what? Her eyes settled on the stack of old crates she'd seen earlier near the fence line. She walked toward them, the heat shimmering above the concrete like a veil. As she approached, the world around her seemed to fall further into a strange rhythm, wind sighing, dust lifting, silence thickening. The crates were weathered, their corners softened by time, their wood splintering like old bones, but one, just one, looked wrong. Its metal edges were too clean, its lid aligned too neatly, its screws hadn't rusted like the others. Lena knelt beside it, Her fingers brushed away thick dust, revealing a faint stenciled label on the top. Storage Unit C-419. Her breath caught. The number again, the same number, the same thread weaving through every clue. She unscrewed the lid carefully. The metal moaned softly. Dust lifted into the air, and inside, beneath layers of old cloth, she found a small black case, its edges protected by foam inserts. She lifted it out, her pulse hammering in her ears. The case wasn't old. It was pristine, sealed, intentional. She snapped open the latch. Inside lay a thin keycard, matte black, unmarked except for a tiny raised symbol in one corner. The symbol she found earlier in the flight logs. The same triangle used in place of signatures. Lena's chest tightened. This wasn't random. This wasn't luck. Someone had prepared this. Someone had expected the right person to find it someday. Her name wasn't written anywhere. No instructions, no note. Just the card, waiting. She held it tightly as she stood. Her shadow stretched long across the runway, merging with the tower's dark silhouette, wet as if guiding her back. The airfield grew still, unnervingly still, as though the entire place sensed the missing piece was finally in her hands. When she reached the keypad again, the green glow pulsed softly in greeting. The groove above it now seemed obvious, purposeful, a place where the card belonged. Lena inhaled and slid the keycard into the slot. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the world changed. A deep, mechanical thud echoed from inside the tower walls, like the release of a decades-old lock. Dust trembled down the siding. The keypad flashed once, twice, then steadied into a bright, silent green. Text appeared across the panel in clean digital clarity. Level C access granted. Station 419 activated. Lena stepped back as the door handle beside her shifted gently, unlocking itself with a soft metallic click that sounded far too deliberate to belong in a place abandoned for decades. She stared at the door. All this time, layers of secrecy, hidden wires, buried keycards, untraceable flight logs, all of it had been leading here. Her hand twitched at her side. She reached for the handle. The air chilled around her. Every sound in the world seemed to fade. The tower door creaked open slowly, revealing darkness, a darkness so deep it felt like stepping into another world. A darkness that had been sealed for decades, preserved, protected, waiting for the moment someone would finally dare to break it open. Light from the runway stretched only a few inches into the black. The rest swallowed everything. Lena's heart pounded. This wasn't an abandoned airport anymore. It wasn't a forgotten ruin. It wasn't even a mystery. It was an entrance, a threshold, a warning, and she had just unlocked it. With the weight of decades of silence pressing against her, and the cool breath of the dark tower washing across her skin, Lena stepped 1 foot toward the threshold, knowing that whatever waited inside would change everything. Because the airport hadn't been built to guide planes. It had been built to hide something, and now that something was awake. As the faint hum deepened inside the walls, Lena realized the story she had walked in. It was no longer hers to control. It had already begun shaping itself around her. By the time Lena stepped backward from the open tower door, the world around her had already begun to change. The air felt heavier, colder, almost charged, as if the entire airport were inhaling sharply before a storm it had been holding back for decades finally broke free. And above her, the once clear sky dimmed with an unsettling speed, clouds sweeping in from the horizon like a dark tide desperate to swallow the sun. She stared into the yawning black doorway. It exhaled a breath of air older and colder than the world outside, carrying with it a metallic tang that clung to her tongue. Something inside that tower had been sealed for a long time, and it had not forgotten why. A low rumble rolled across the sky. Thunder, deep, slow warning. Wind tore across the runway. rattling the broken landing lights, and sending loose papers from the passenger building spiraling into the air like startled birds. Lena stepped back instinctively, shielding her eyes from the sudden burst of grit. The storm was coming fast, too fast for weather that had been calm only minutes before. Another crack of thunder split the silence. The storm wasn't approaching, it was converging, drawn to this place, drawn to the moment she had opened the door, drawn to whatever slept inside. Lena tightened her jacket and pressed a hand against the metal doorframe, steadying herself as the wind surged. It roared across the tarmac, racing along the cracked runways until it slammed into the tower base with a tremble that vibrated through the concrete. The sky darkened further, now the color of bruised slate. What remained of sunlight was swallowed whole, leaving the airfield washed in a gray so heavy it felt almost physical. Lena looked up at the control tower's observation deck, watching lightning flicker across the glass in thin white veins. That single unbroken window didn't reflect the world anymore. It glowed, just faintly, just enough to feel alive. Her pulse quickened. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't weather. This was the first consequence of unlocking the tower. The storm moved with too much intention, as if following a script written long before she was born. The keypad beside her flickered, its green glow stuttering like a failing heartbeat. Lena pressed her fingers against the panel to steady it, but the device vibrated beneath her touch, alive, alert, destabilized by whatever forces were now gathering above. Lightning cracked again, closer this time. The flash was blinding, painting the tower in stark white light for an instant. Rain followed in a sudden, brutal sheet, slamming against the runway so hard it echoed like 1,000 small explosions. Within seconds, Lena was drenched. Within seconds, the world had changed. She pulled the tower door open wider, stepping beneath its partial shelter as she wiped rainwater from her face. The storm howled, pushing wind into the doorway as if trying to shove her inside. She steadied herself, gripping the frame, refusing to be forced anywhere. But when a burst of lightning lit the sky once more, this time directly overhead, she saw something that made her breath catch. The runway lights flickered, just once, a faint, sickly glow, a pulse of electricity that should not exist. The airport had no power, no generator, no grid connection, no functioning systems, yet one row of lights, maybe 10 in total, buzzed to life for a heartbeat before dying again. And beneath that fleeting glow, in the center of the runway, stood a silhouette, not a person, not an animal, something smaller, something metallic, something shaped like an old communications unit, one she'd never seen out here before. But when the next flash came, the silhouette was gone. Lena's heart hammered against her ribs. The rain intensified, slashing sideways as fierce gusts ripped across the open field. Thunder shook the tower's foundation. The storm was no longer ordinary. It was violent, urgent, unnatural. It wasn't just hitting the airport. It was hitting the tower itself, as though trying to drown out its awakening. The keypad sputtered again. A harsh digital squeal burst from its speaker. The green text fractured into broken lines. Lena pressed her palm against it, trying to steady the panel, but then a loud pop erupted inside the wall. The keypad went dark. Completely dead, her breath sharpened. Whatever system lay beneath this airport, whatever ancient circuitry or hidden power source had kept that keypad alive, it had been overwhelmed by the storm. Or worse, the storm had been drawn to it, as if the atmosphere was reacting to a frequency she couldn't hear. The wind snapped violently, ripping a length of metal, siding from the tower with a scream. It crashed against the concrete near her feet, sparks flying as it scraped across the ground. Lena jumped back, her pulse spiking with adrenaline. She had two choices now: step into the tower's darkness, where secrets waited with quiet, terrifying patience, or face a storm that didn't behave like any storm she had ever seen. The world outside cracked with another blaze of lightning, the airport shook, the runway lights flickered again, this time longer, brighter, and she swore she saw movement at the far hangars. Something or someone was out there. The tower door creaked, swinging in the wind like a whispering invitation. Lena gripped the handle with white, knuckled determination. She felt the cold metal pulse faintly beneath her fingers, as if the tower itself were urging her inside. The air that drifted from within was not warm or stale. It was chilled, metallic, humming with hidden currents of dormant machinery. Rain pounded the runway, thunder roared overhead. The storm was swallowing the sky. Whatever secrets lay inside, that tower had been locked away for decades. But they were still better than the unnatural fury unfolding outside. And as the runway lights flickered again, casting an eerie glow across the drenched asphalt, Lena felt a realization tighten around her chest. The storm wasn't forcing her into the tower. It was trying to keep something else inside. She stepped across the threshold, and the door behind her slammed shut with a metallic finality that swallowed the outside world whole. The sound echoed through the tower's hollow interior like the end of a chapter, written long before she arrived. And as the storm raged outside, Lena realized she was finally inside the heart of the place that had been calling her, and whatever waited in the darkness ahead had been waiting a very long time. The tower swallowed the storm's roar the moment Lena crossed the threshold, leaving her standing in a silence so deep it felt alive. Only the faintest hint of thunder seeped through the thick concrete, muted and distant, as if the world outside had been sealed behind a wall of time instead of a door. The air inside was shockingly cold, colder than the rain. Soaked wind she'd escaped, its chill wrapping around her skin like the breath of something ancient. Her eyes adjusted slowly. For the first time, she saw the interior of the control tower that had been locked for decades. Dust floated in the air like drifting ash, catching fragments of the dim grey light leaking through a cracked window high above. The room smelled of metal, paper, and a strange sterile sharpness, as though something deep beneath the floor still pulsed faintly with power. The hollow echo of the storm above was replaced by something else, a soft mechanical hum, low, steady, rhythmic. It wasn't coming from the walls, it wasn't coming from the ceiling, it was rising from the floor, deep within the tower's foundation. Lena's pulse throbbed in her ears as she stepped forward, her boots stirring coils of dust that glimmered in the faint light. Her fingers brushed against the peeling paint of the interior wall, feeling the rough texture beneath the cold dampness that had seeped inside with her. The door behind her remained sealed shut, but she didn't reach for it. She didn't need to. The truth settled over her with unsettling certainty. Even if she tried, she doubted it would open. The tower had closed her in deliberately. Her flashlight beam cut a narrow path through the dark, revealing old radio desks pushed against the far walls. Their surfaces were covered with thick dust, tangled wiring, and relics of forgotten communications. Microphones, headsets, rusted knobs frozen mid-frequency. None of it looked touched since the day the tower had gone silent, yet everything felt wrong. Something had been removed, not destroyed, not abandoned, removed. Spaces where equipment once sat were unnaturally clean, leaving rectangular outlines of absence. Dust patterns didn't lie. Someone had cleared this place methodically, taking what mattered and leaving the shell behind. Lena traced one of the empty outlines with her finger. Cold, perfectly clean, recent. She swallowed. Someone else had been inside this tower long after it was shut down. Someone with access. Someone who knew what to take and what to hide. The mechanical hum beneath the floor deepened, vibrating faintly against the soles of her boots. Not loud, not threatening, but undeniably active. A sound no abandoned building should possess. A sound that didn't belong to decay or time. Her flashlight flicked toward the far corner of the room. There, beneath a cracked layer of linoleum, was a seam in the floor, thin, precise, almost invisible, but she recognized the engineering instantly, a hatch. Not the kind maintenance crews used, not the kind put in place by a county airport office. This was different, industrial, reinforced, built with purpose. She knelt beside it, sweeping dust away with the back of her sleeve. The square outline grew clearer. A recessed handle sat flush against the surface, its edges worn by hands that must have pulled it hundreds of times. She grasped it firmly, expecting resistance. Instead, it lifted with haunting ease. A breath of cold air surged upward, carrying the scent of sealed metal and stale power. The darkness below was thicker than the room above, swallowing her flashlight beam as though refusing illumination. The hum grew louder. She leaned forward. A narrow staircase descended into the depth, steel steps, gray and precise, untouched by corrosion. The air temperature dropped sharply, wrapping her lungs in a cold so deep it felt like she was inhaling shadows. Her fingers tightened around the flashlight. This was level C, the hidden level, the place mentioned in the frantic notes, the access point someone had erased from the official records. She steadied her breath. She had unlocked the tower. Now the tower was inviting her deeper. A thunderclap shook the building overhead, making dust drift from the ceiling in soft little cascades. The storm above had grown violent, raging against the tower walls like a beast denied entry. But down here, everything remained calm, still, listening. Lena took the first step downward. Her foot pressed against the steel, and the entire staircase vibrated subtly, as if acknowledging her presence. She hesitated, hand gripping the rail. It was ice cold, so cold that it numbed her palm almost instantly. The hum beneath her feet deepened. Lena continued downward. Each step took her further from the world above, further from rain, from wind, from sky, into a silence so profound it swallowed her breath. The flashlight beam quivered along the walls. They were smooth, polished metal, nothing like the dilapidated construction upstairs. This wasn't built in the 1960s. It wasn't FAA standard. This was engineered for secrecy. As she reached the final step, her boot touched concrete. The hum surrounded her now. Her light fell across a narrow corridor stretching ahead, perfectly straight, perfectly symmetrical, disappearing into darkness. Dust lay across the floor in a thin, undisturbed line, except for one detail that made her heart stutter. Footprints, not old, not smudged, not faded, clear, sharp, recent, they led forward into the darkness, and they were not hers. Lena froze. Someone had been here, not years ago, not months ago, recently. The hair along her arms prickled. In the silence, her breath echoed faintly off the steel walls like the place was repeating her exhale back to her. She crouched to examine the prints more closely. Boots. Large, deep impressions, a stride that suggested urgency or direction. The prints led deeper into the corridor, vanishing into the dark like a trail left by a ghost that knew exactly where it was going. Her stomach tightened with a pull she recognized, fear tangled with purpose. She lifted her head slowly, her breath forming pale vapor in the cold air. She wasn't alone in this underground level. Someone else had been moving through these corridors. Someone who knew the way. Someone who'd walked these steps long after the airport had been sealed. The hum vibrated the walls again, steady and constant, like a heartbeat buried beneath concrete. Lena stepped forward. One step, then another, following footprints that did not belong to her toward a truth that had waited in the dark long before she ever arrived. And as she moved deeper into the cold corridor, leaving the storm and the surface world behind, Lena realized something with absolute clarity. Unlocking the tower had not opened a path. It had awakened one. The deeper Lena moved into the narrow corridor, the more the darkness seemed to breathe around her. Cold, patient, ancient. The hum beneath the concrete floor was steady now, vibrating up through her boots like a distant engine buried far below. Every footstep she took echoed softly, swallowed almost immediately by the density of the underground air. The footprints ahead of her remained crisp in the dust, a silent reminder that she was not the first person to walk this hidden hall. Only the first in a very long time who wasn't supposed to. Her flashlight beam stretched down the corridor, catching flecks of metal embedded in the smooth walls, small, deliberate, engineered with the same precision she'd seen in the tower wiring. This was no forgotten basement. This was a facility designed with intention, built by hands that understood secrecy. Lena paused, resting her free palm against the wall, cold, smooth, untouched by time. Nothing down here matched the age of the airport above. It felt newer, cleaner, maintained, as though whoever had built this level had cared more about protecting what lay beneath the tower than keeping the runways alive. She continued forward, her breath forming pale clouds in the frigid air. The corridor extended impossibly straight, its symmetry unsettling. Every 10 feet, a thin strip of metal crossed the floor expansion joints designed to handle shifting pressure or temperature changes. Industrial, grade, modern, hidden under a forgotten airfield where they didn't remotely belong. Her beam caught something on the left wall, a faded sign half covered by dust. Maintenance Hall Level C Secure Zone. A chill slid down her spine. This wasn't a storage area, this wasn't an accident, this was a controlled environment, built beneath the tower for reasons no county archive had ever acknowledged. She moved deeper, following the footprints. Eventually, the corridor opened into a larger chamber, a room so wide her flashlight barely reached the walls. The air shifted with her entrance, carrying the faint scent of insulated circuitry and old metal. Rows of consoles lined the walls, covered in sheets of dust. But not all of them. One console, near the far end of the room, was spotless. Her pulse quickened. She approached cautiously, each step measured. Layers of dust coated the surrounding floor, yet the ground beside the console had been disturbed. Subtle marks of boots, the faint scuff of a knee, the imprint of a case set down briefly. Someone had knelt here. And someone had wiped the console clean. Lena's heart pounded as she leaned closer. The machine itself was outdated by modern standards, 1980 hardware, all knobs and switches and glowing sockets. But the workmanship was meticulous. Government, grade, purpose, built. Her light traced the labels beneath the controls. Camera feed sector, 3 monitoring auxiliary power control, primary vault systems. The word hit her like a physical blow. She had suspected secrecy. She had suspected hidden infrastructure, but a vault she swallowed hard. This wasn't storage for tools or supplies. It was storage for something of value. She reached toward the console's main switch, hesitating as the cold metal brushed her fingertips. She expected resistance, a lock, a dead circuit, but the switch moved with eerie ease, smooth, almost welcoming. A low hum drifted through the chamber, then click. A single monitor on the wall flickered to life. Its screen glowed weakly with a sickly, green tint, struggling against decades of darkness. Horizontal lines rolled across it in haze, static, trying to fight through a signal that had been dormant for far too long. Lena stepped closer, holding her breath. An image slowly formed, a hallway, metal, reinforced underground, not the one she was standing in, but one deeper still. Her flashlight beam jittered slightly as she realized the truth. This facility had multiple levels. The camera feed crackled. Something shifted on screen. A door sliding open. the image too grainy to reveal what lay behind it. But Lena saw movement, a shadow, a flicker of a figure at the edge of the frame. Then the screen stuttered and dissolved into static. Her pulse hammered, sharp and cold. Someone was down here, not years ago, not decades ago, now. She forced herself away from the flickering monitor, scanning the rest of the chamber. On a nearby desk, half buried under dust, she spotted a thick binder, the kind she'd already seen upstairs. She brushed the dust away. Vault operations, level 4, strict clearance, only her breath hitched. Level 4, not level C, deeper still. She opened the binder. Inside, pages were filled with typed instructions, flow charts, emergency procedures, every line pointing to a facility designed to store extremely sensitive materials during national emergencies. Not tools, not documents, assets, controlled assets. One page repeated. Her fingers trembled as she turned the page. A final entry, typed, not handwritten, stared up at her. All personnel, do not enter level 4 without authorization. Final clearance suspended until further notice. Operation Fairway Shutdown is in effect. Lena's breath turned shallow. Operation Fairway Shutdown. The phrase was cold and sharp, as if carved from metal. She flipped to the next page, only to find it torn out. The page after that torn, entire sections removed. Someone had taken they didn't want found, and left only what couldn't incriminate them. Thunder boomed above, muffled but still powerful, as if the storm were trying to break through the concrete and drag her back upstairs. But Lena didn't look up. She didn't move. She didn't breathe. Her light fell on something in the corner. A door, steel, heavily reinforced, marked with a number she recognized instantly. 419. Her pulse stuttered. The same number on the tag, the same number on the crate, the same number tied to everything she had uncovered so far. This wasn't a coincidence. It was a system, a structure of secrets built around that single designation. She stepped toward the door, feeling the cold radiate from its steel surface. Her fingertips brushed the numbers, and for a moment she felt as if the metal beneath them pulsed faintly, like a memory awakening. Somewhere behind this door lay the truth the tower had guarded, the truth the airport had been built to hide, the truth someone had shut down an entire facility to bury. But Lena didn't turn back, because she already knew the next step. She slid her hand into her pocket and closed her fingers around the keycard she had found in the crate. It felt heavier now, as though it understood exactly where she was standing. As she lifted it slowly toward the door's lock panel, the hum beneath the floor deepened, vibrating through the walls, through her ribs, through the air itself. The door before her wasn't just a barrier. It was a threshold, and beyond it waited the next layer of a secret that had been hidden from the world for decades. Lena took a single breath, steady and cold, and raised the card toward the lock. Whatever lay behind this door, the airport had tried desperately to keep inside, and she was about to open it. The keycard hovered inches from the lock panel as the underground hum deepened into a low, resonant vibration, so steady it seemed to pulse through the air like a heartbeat. Lena hesitated, feeling the cold breath rising from the steel beneath her fingertips. The door marked 419 wasn't just a piece of metal. It felt like the skin of something dormant, something holding its last inhale, waiting for her next move. The panel beside the door flickered, just once, a single pale light, almost too faint to see. As if sensing the presence of the card, Lena pressed it forward. The moment the keycard touched the lock, a sharp electronic click snapped through the corridor. The panel lit up fully, green lines tracing across its surface like veins awakening for the first time in years. A digital tone chime, low, precise, mechanical, then a second tone, a deeper one, a confirmation. The air shifted. Every particle of dust, hanging in the light, trembled, suspended in a stillness that felt almost reverent. The reinforced door shuddered once, as though stirring from a long sleep. Then, with a slow metallic groan, it began to slide open, inch by inch, heavy locks releasing themselves from deep within the walls. Cold air rushed out, sharper than before, biting at her skin, carrying a faint scent of metal and something older. Something preserved. Lena held her breath. The room beyond revealed itself like a secret peeling back its first layer. Dark, wide, silent, a long, narrow chamber stretched ahead, illuminated only by her trembling flashlight beam. Rows of consoles lined the walls, sleek, angular forms that did not belong beneath a rural airport. Thick cables snaked across the floor, their insulation pristine despite the decades. Everything here was far too modern, far too deliberate to match the abandoned world above. At the far end of the chamber, a glassing, closed control booth overlooked the entire room like the eye of a sleeping giant. But something else drew her attention first. On a platform in the center of the room stood a tall, stainless steel pillar, solid, seamless, perfect. At its base, a small digital panel blinked with soft blue light, bathing the floor in an eerie glow. It was humming, softly, steadily, alive, the same vibration she'd felt on the runway, the same faint pulse behind the keypad. All of it led here. This was the source. Her footsteps echoed as she entered the chamber. The door slid shut behind her with a final, echoing thud, sealing her inside with the quiet hum of ancient machinery. She didn't flinch, she didn't turn back. She felt the truth here, just beyond reach, tugging her forward. Her flashlight swept across the closest console. Dust coated the surface, but the equipment was intact. Monitors, switches, cables, ports she recognized from military documentation she'd seen years ago but never worked on directly. Then something caught her eye. A thin folder sat on the console, its cover immaculate compared to the abandoned surroundings. She brushed her thumb over the title. Level 4 Restricted Operations Log. Her heart dropped into her stomach. Level 4, the deeper chamber, the final space referenced in the binder upstairs. She opened it carefully. Inside were typed entries, brief, cold, clinical, vault assets received, verification pending, storage seals reinforced, no perimeter breach detected, authorization rerouted, Operation Fairway shutdown initiated, personnel clearance revoked until further directive. Then, one chilling final line, Level 4 operations suspended, assets remain in cold storage. Cold storage? Lena's breath trembled. The word took on new meaning in the frigid underground air. She lifted her light toward the stainless steel pillar again. The hum deepened, vibrating like a quiet warning, or a quiet welcome. At its base was a small access panel marked Core Seal Maintenance. Override. Her throat tightened. Was this the vault, or simply the entrance to it? A sudden metallic bang echoed from somewhere deeper inside the chamber. Lena froze, muscles locking in place. Not the hum, not the machinery, not the storm overhead. Something had moved inside the facility. Her light flicked across the rows of equipment. Nothing shifted. No shadows crawled, no doors opened, but the sound lingered, vibrating faintly through the metal structures around her. The footprints she had followed suddenly felt closer than ever. She wasn't alone down here. Not now, maybe not ever. She moved slowly toward the control booth at the far end of the room. Its glass walls were fogged, but she could make out silhouettes of equipment inside machines that looked far too advanced for an airport, even a secret facility. When she gripped the booth handle, the door clicked open without resistance. The interior was shockingly clean, dust barely settling on the consoles inside. Someone had been here not long ago. Her flashlight slid across the panels until it caught one monitor left slightly ajar. A single sheet of paper was tucked underneath it. She eased it out carefully. A schematic, lines, circuits, access ports, and in the center, encased within layers of reinforced steel, a single chamber labeled Level 4 Primary Asset Vault. The vault existed. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, physically, and below her feet, somewhere deeper in the structure, sat whatever this facility had been built to hide since the late 80s. Her pulse accelerated as she ran her thumb across the corner of the schematic. Someone had scribbled something in the margin, a single name, written in haste, barely legible, Harwood. Lena's breath stopped. Her last name, her father's last name. The air felt thinner, colder, more alive. Her flashlight trembled. Had he worked here? Had he known about this place? Was this why everything in her life had quietly pointed her toward engineering, toward solving problems, toward machines? Or was it a warning left behind by someone who knew she would come? Before she could process the implications, a faint mechanical whir sounded behind her. She turned sharply. The stainless steel pillar's blue panel had changed. New text blinked across the surface. Override ready. Access code required. Lena stepped closer, heart pounding. This was it. The next seal, the next layer, the next truth waiting beneath the ground. She raised the keycard again, her hand trembling not from fear, but from the electric certainty that she was standing on the edge of discovering what the tower had been guarding all along. The hum deepened. The floor vibrated. The vault waited. And as Lena lifted the card toward the glowing panel, she realized the storm above hadn't been a danger at all. It had been a warning, because whatever lay inside Level 4, the world had not been ready for it then, and it might not be ready for it now. With a steady breath, Lena pressed the card forward, and the chamber lit up like an awakening giant. The chamber erupted in a blinding white pulse the instant Lena pressed the keycard against the glowing panel. An eruption of light so clean and violent it carved sharp silhouettes across the steel walls. She stumbled back, shielding her eyes as a low, rising whir shook the floor beneath her boots. It wasn't the chaotic rumble of old machinery struggling to wake. It was too smooth, too controlled, too precise, like a system merely resuming a job it had been forced to abandon mid-breath. The pillar at the center of the room split open along a seamless vertical line she hadn't noticed before. Cold vapor poured out from the widening crack, flooding the floor in a slow, silver mist that coiled around her ankles like drifting smoke. The air temperature dropped sharply. Her breath crystallized in front of her as the floor hummed with a deeper, more resonant vibration. Then the light cleared, and Lena saw what the pillar had been hiding. At its core, embedded within a cradle of reinforced steel, sat a device no bigger than a suitcase, rectangular, metallic, wrapped in dense protective shielding. Its surface was engraved with federal markings she recognized from engineering manuals but had never expected to see in person. U.S. Treasury Secure Asset Division, Cold Storage Unit, Fairway Classification, Level 4 Access. Only her heart slammed against her ribs. This wasn't airport technology. This wasn't aviation. This was federal containment. She moved closer, her breath shallow, her pulse ricocheting in her ears. The shielding on the device was unlike anything she'd seen. Layers of composite metal designed to withstand fire, explosion, electromagnetic pulse, even sub-zero freezing. Tiny rivets along the casing glimmered faintly beneath a layer of frost, and at its center, embedded like a jewel, was a biometric scanner ringed in faded yellow tape. Primary dock authorized hand. Only her throat tightened. This was the first confirmation she'd found, official, undeniable, that the facility was not just secret. It was protected, Whatever was stored inside this unit, it wasn't meant to be touched, moved, or even known about, except by the highest levels of clearance. Lena reached toward the scanner, not to activate it, but to steady herself against the magnitude of what stood before her. Her fingers trembled above the frost-coated metal. The cold radiating from the device felt unnatural, controlled, engineered to preserve something the world couldn't afford to lose, or couldn't afford to find. But as she leaned in closer, her flashlight beam caught something carved into the metal beneath the frost. A small inscription, faint, hidden at the very bottom of the casing. "Do not unlock unless final order is issued." The letters were jagged, uneven, not etched by machine, scratched in by hand. Lena's breath caught. Someone had overridden the official markings. Someone had left a warning. Before she could process the meaning, the machinery behind the pillar stirred again, gears shifting deeper within the floor. The lights above flickered. A sharp click echoed through the chamber, loud enough to jerk her attention upward. The screens in the control booth lit up one by one, flickering, struggling, then stabilizing. Old analog monitors awakened with a grainy hum, their screens filling with data feeds she couldn't immediately decipher. Rows of numbers, temperature readings, pressure levels, structural integrity charts, all of them pointing to something deeper below. A new line of text blinked across one screen: Level 4, station sealed. Last entry, February 12, 1991. Lena's pulse froze. The date the airport supposedly closed. The day everything stopped. The day the facility went dark. She swallowed hard, stepping toward the booth as the monitors continued spooling out data like a dying system confessing its final secrets. Another line of text appeared: personnel redirected, operation fairway shut down, evidence staged, surface operations terminated, assets left in place, awaiting extraction order, assets left in place. Lena's eyes drifted back to the cold storage unit. Was this one of them, or was it simply the mechanism guarding something bigger? Her gaze swept the chamber, searching, tracing every shadow, until it fell on a reinforced door on the far left wall. Unlike the others, this one bore no number, no label, only a single emblem she recognized instantly, a treasury seal, deeply engraved, perfectly preserved. This was it, the vault, not the small storage unit. Not the pillar, this door, the true heart of Level 4. A quiet gasp escaped her lips as she walked toward it, each step heavier than the one before. The closer she got, the colder the air became, until her fingers stiffened and her breath flowed in white plumes. Frost coated the lower edges of the steel, spreading outward in delicate crystalline veins. Her flashlight landed on the locking mechanism, another biometric scanner, another access panel, another barrier built for someone with far more authority than she possessed. But beneath the panel, someone had left a second-hand, carved message, scratched into the metal with desperate, uneven strokes. "If you're reading this, don't trust the logs." Lena's breath wavered. Fear rippled beneath her ribs, cold and thin, like a wire pulling tight. Someone who worked down here had tried to warn whoever came next. Someone who knew this vault was more than a sealed room. Someone who scratched that message knowing they might never leave. She stepped back from the door as the underground hum deepened, resonating through the walls like a warning drum. Then a noise behind her, soft, barely audible, but unmistakable, a footstep. Lena spun around. Her light caught only empty space. Consoles, steel walls, drifting mist. But the sound came again, not the hum, not machinery, a real footstep in the room with her. Her heart thundered, beating so loudly she could feel it in her spine. Someone else was here, not just footprints in dust, a presence, alive, moving. Her voice caught in her throat. The storm above had raged with unnatural timing. The systems here had awakened too easily. And the moment she touched the keycard, someone, or something, had been triggered. She lifted her flashlight slowly, steadying the beam. The cold mist shifted, soundless, like breath. The next footstep came from behind one of the tall consoles. Closer, sharper, followed by the faintest scrape of metal on concrete. Lena's fingers tightened around the flashlight. Whoever had been walking these corridors was no longer ahead of her. They were here, in the chamber, in the cold, in the dark, watching her, and as the hum vibrated through the steel once more, slow, steady, growing louder, Lena realized something with chilling clarity. The vault wasn't the only thing that had been left behind. Someone had stayed. The silence that followed the last footstep was not empty. It pressed against Lena's skin like a cold hand, tightening across her ribs, urging her to stand still, too still. Even the humming machinery seemed to hesitate, lowering its pitch as if the entire chamber were holding its breath. Lena backed toward the center of the room, her light trembling across the frost-covered metal. The mist curling around her ankles thickened, moving strangely against the air currents, as though disturbed by something she could not see. Then movement. A shadow flickered across the far wall, quick, sharp, too defined to be a trick of the light. Lena swung her flashlight toward it. Nothing, but the mist parted, and a faint warmth lingered where something had just passed through the cold. Her pulse slammed against her throat. Every instinct screamed to run, but there was nowhere to run to, no exits except the sealed door behind her and the reinforced vault ahead. The storm outside had driven her underground, but the storm wasn't what she needed to fear now. She forced her breath to steady. "Hello," she whispered, her voice cracking against the cold metal. No answer, only the hum, and the sound of something shifting, barely audible, somewhere between the consoles. A soft scrape, a slow inhale, the subtle displacement of air. Someone was hiding, or waiting, or watching. She scanned the room, flashlight trembling as she swept past the tall pillar. The cold storage unit sat silently inside its cradle, but its frost-covered surface seemed to pulse faintly with every breath she took, like a heartbeat syncing with her own. The tiny screen on the unit blinked again. Override pending authorized user required. Her stomach tightened. Authorized user. Whoever was down here might be that user, or worse. They might be trying to stop her from becoming one. Another sound, closer, a faint metallic tap, deliberate, coming from behind the nearest console. Lena kept her beam low, slow, sweeping across the floor. The mist swirled, revealing the faint outline of a boot print that had not been there a moment ago, fresh, close, belonging to someone who was now only a few steps away. Her breath caught painfully. Who's there? Stronger this time, sharper. The answer came not in words, but in motion. A figure stepped out from behind the console, lowly, as if testing the air, a silhouette solidifying from shadow. Broad shoulders, heavy boots, gloved hands, clothing that did not match the dust or age of the facility. Dark, insulated, tactical. Lena's heart jolted. He wasn't a relic from the past. He was modern. Prepared, equipped. He had known about this place. He had come down here willingly, and he was staring at her. Her flashlight lifted instinctively, but the beam trembled when it found his face. Pale in the cold, jaw tense, eyes hollowed with exhaustion. Or something darker. He looked like someone who had been underground far too long. He raised a hand slightly, not in greeting, but in warning. "Don't touch that," he said, voice hoarse, strained, cracking like it hadn't been used in days. Or years. The words echoed through the chamber with heavy weight. He pointed toward the cold storage unit behind her. "Whatever you do," he rasped, "don't activate the vault." Lena's throat dried. "How did you? Who are you?" she whispered. The man stepped closer. The light caught the edges of his gear. Military, grade fabric, reinforced plates, a faded emblem on his sleeve worn nearly to nothing. He looked like someone from a project long stripped from records, a ghost of a classified mission that had never ended. He swallowed hard, eyes darting around the chamber as if expecting something else to emerge from the shadows. "I was assigned here," he said, "a long time ago, longer than anyone on the surface remembers." He dragged a shaking hand through his hair. "But they sealed level 4 after the shutdown. They left me here with the asset." Left him. The word hit Lena like ice. "You mean," she whispered, unable to finish the sentence. "Yes." His voice cracked. "They abandoned the facility, but the vault, it wasn't empty, it never was." The hum beneath the floor vibrated again, deeper now, more insistent, as though reacting to the conversation. The lights above flickered. Frost peeled from the vault door in fragile flakes. The man took another step forward. They didn't expect anyone to find this place again. He whispered, "Not until extraction, not until the order came." His eyes locked onto hers. No one was supposed to activate anything, especially not without clearance. Lena's breath hitched as the realization tightened around her chest. This wasn't just a vault. This was an operation frozen in time. A mission suspended mid-command. A secret buried alive beneath an entire airport. And the man standing in front of her alive, exhausted, hollow-eyed, was the last witness. She stepped back instinctively, her shoulder brushing against the cold pillar. A sharp beep echoed behind her. The cold storage unit's panel glowed again. "Identity lock pending, stand by." The man's expression twisted with panic. "No," he hissed, rushing forward. "Don't let it scan you. Don't even be near it." Lena stumbled away as he reached the pillar, his gloved hands slamming against the panel in desperation. But the machine did not respond to him. The scanner glowed brighter, reaching into the mist with a flickering pulse. It was searching, scanning, choosing. Lena's pulse roared in her ears. The man turned to her, breath ragged, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and something deeper recognition. "What did you bring in with you?" he asked quietly. "What made it wake up?" Lena's mind raced the keycard, the logs, the tower door, the name scratched in the vault's frame. Harwood, her father's last name. She swallowed hard. "I don't know." But the man's gaze said otherwise. Before he could speak again, the machine beeped sharply. Biometric match detected access initialized. Lena froze. The man froze. The room fell impossibly still. Then the panel lit with a final cold line of text. "Harwood lineage confirmed." The hum surged beneath the floor. The vault door groaned, the air dropped further, becoming painfully cold. The man staggered backward, shaking his head in horror. "No, not now, not her." He reached for her arm, voice trembling. "You have to listen to me. The vault doesn't open for strangers. It opens for blood. And if it's opening for you..." Before he could finish, a thunderous metallic boom exploded through the chamber as the reinforced vault door shuddered violently, unlocking, unsealing, awakening, and Lena realized with chilling clarity, whatever her father had been part of, whatever Operation Fairway had been designed to protect, whatever had been locked away in Level 4 since 1991, was calling for her. The vault door buckled inward with a deep, metallic groan that rolled through the chamber like the opening breath of something enormous. Lena staggered back as frost shattered off the steel in crystalline flakes, scattering like broken diamonds across the concrete floor. The cold hit her next, an arctic wave surging from the widening seam, so sharp it stabbed straight through her clothes and seized her lungs. The man beside her flinched, his jaw locking tight as he braced himself against a console. "It's responding to you," he whispered, voice raw with dread. "It shouldn't be responding to anyone." Lena's pulse hammered, each thud echoing through her chest like a drum too close to the skin. The vault door continued sliding open, inch by heavy inch, as pressurized air hissed from the narrowing gap, air that had not tasted the world above since the final shutdown 34 years ago. A low, rhythmic thrum began beneath the floor. Different from the hum before, deeper, more deliberate, as if some deeper system, something far below this chamber, was waking after decades of silence. Lena's flashlight beam trembled across the widening darkness inside the vault. At first she saw nothing, only black, pure and absolute. But as the door peeled back further, she saw the faintest glimmer, light reflecting off metal, rows of metal, crates, tall, reinforced, sealed with official embossments and faded federal markings. Her breath caught. They stood in silent formation like soldiers waiting for inspection, stacked precisely from floor to ceiling, each with identical stenciling. U.S. Treasury Secure Asset Vault Category, a restricted do not unseal without final order. The man stepped closer, fear and awe tangling in his expression. They never extracted it, he whispered. All these years, they never came back. Lena couldn't speak. Her throat felt tight, as if the air inside the vault were too heavy to breathe. She stepped closer, her flashlight trembling as the beam skimmed across the smooth surfaces of the crates. Then she saw it. One crate, just one, sat open. Its lid leaned crookedly to the side, frost clinging to its edges like white moss. Inside, rows of tightly wrapped bundles sat neatly, rectangular, paper-banded, pristine. The breath left her lungs in a single, weak gasp. Cash, stacks upon stacks of mint, condition U.S. currency, uncirculated, untouched. She counted them quickly in her mind, each bundle sealed, each brick crisp, each row packed with flawless precision. Millions, dozens of millions, hundreds. Her words slipped out barely as a whisper. This is the missing Federal Reserve shipment. The man didn't react with shock. He reacted with something closer to despair. This wasn't supposed to stay here, he said. It was temporary, a safeguard, a precaution in case the system collapsed. It was meant to be retrieved, but it wasn't. Lena murmured, "Why not?" He didn't answer. Or maybe he couldn't. The deeper hum beneath the floor grew louder, vibrating through her boots with a slow, steady rhythm, like a mechanical heartbeat rising to consciousness for the first time in decades. Lena took a cautious step inside the vault. The air changed instantly, colder, still, so thick with silence it felt like gravity doubling. Her light swept across a long metal table near the back wall, its surface covered with papers that had long since curled from cold and age. She approached slowly, brushing frost away with the back of her sleeve. Documents, blueprints, sealed notes stamped classified, and a small, taped envelope with the name Harwood written across the front. Lena's blood turned to ice. Her hand hovered above the envelope, trembling. Her father, her family, her name, all tied to a vault buried under a forgotten airfield. The man took a step toward her. "Don't touch that," he said quietly. But Lena's fingers were already closing around the paper. It crackled beneath her grip, fragile, preserved by cold but delicate enough to crumble if handled wrong. She lifted it slowly, feeling the weight of the entire facility settle onto her shoulders. The hum again, louder, stronger. The lights above flickered. The air beneath the floor groaned with pressure. Something massive shifted in the depths. The man looked around in sudden alarm. "No, no, no," he muttered, stepping away from the pillar as if afraid of what might come next. "The system is reawakening. It's recognizing a clearance trigger." Lena turned toward him. "From me?" He swallowed hard. "Yes, from you, and from whatever you just touched. The envelope, the vault." Her father's name, everything connected in ways she wasn't ready to comprehend. A sudden mechanical jolt shuddered the floor, nearly knocking her off balance. The vault lights flickered violently, casting long, warped shadows that stretched across the sealed crates like skeletal fingers clawing for release. The man steadied himself against the wall. "This facility was never meant to activate again," he said. "If it's waking, if it's recognizing blood, Then whatever they hid in level 4 wasn't just money. The hum grew into a growl. Then a hollow, thunderous clunk echoed from beneath the vault floor. A new mechanism engaging. A new lock releasing. A deeper door opening. Lena felt her lungs seize. "What's happening?" she whispered. The man's eyes darkened with grim recognition. "This vault, it has 2 layers," he said softly.